according to individuals familiar with his thinking. So far, at least 5 names, all of them federal appeals court judges, have emerged from the president's short list. For more, I'm joined by Robert Costa, a national political reporter for The Washington Post, Zerlina Maxwell, director of progressive programming for SiriusXM, and Susan Del Percio, a Republican strategist. All are MSNBC political analysts. Robert Costa, let me start with you. We got the reporting the president wants Harvard or Yale perhaps on this, but there's a number of names that are out there. What is your sense of this? Is this a pick where the White House kind of knows where it wants to go? How much of this is a potential for a surprise here?
There's still a potential for surprise. The process is fluid. Talking to White House officials and senior Republicans all day, it's evident that at this point, at end of day Monday, that Judge Kavanaugh and Judge Coney Barrett are widely seen in the president's circle as probably the top 2 candidates, but Judge Kethledge and Judge Thapar and Judge Pryor and several others are very much still in the mix. The president wants to meet them, see if they have a rapport, and also see the public response to these reported meetings.
You mentioned Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett. Those are the 2, Robert Costa, they're suggesting maybe getting the most conversation. Susan, let me ask you, if this is going to go down, a Republican, at least one of them, would have to vote against this. So Susan Collins has now stepped forward and has suggested that she could be that Republican, and the issue in that case would be Roe versus Wade. Says if somebody expresses hostility, she could be a no vote. I'm looking at a senator, though, in Susan Collins, who's voted for Sam Alito, she voted for John Roberts, and she voted for Neil Gorsuch. So if that's the standard of who she's willing to find acceptable, are any of these names we're talking about now going to plausibly reach unacceptable to her?
Probably not, because if it is party line votes, she doesn't want her legacy to be that of something she cares about, the woman who led to the overturn of Roe v. Wade. That being said, however, I don't think that it's going to fall strictly on party lines. I think that we will see a couple of Democrats probably go over, like Joe Manchin or Donnelly, excuse me, sorry about that, and maybe even Jones from Alabama. I mean, he's
right. Sure, those are the Democrats from the Democratic standpoint.
So they could give her cover. That will end up giving her cover to potentially do a no vote. But just to follow up on what Robert said, I think it's completely possible to see a wild card that we never saw coming. Trump has really been out there kind of running his own shop lately. And the idea that he would look for someone who would be a loyalist to him, knowing that Mueller's coming down the pike, I think is very much well in the realm of possibilities.
Zerlina, from the standpoint of Democrats who are looking to stop this thing and looking to find a Republican vote there, how much hope do you think they can or should take from what Susan Collins is saying?
Look, I don't think that we got to put our pin our hopes on hope, for lack of a better expression, because I think that in this particular moment, with so many things on the line, voting rights, women's rights, workers' rights, affirmative action, you have to fight even if you know you ultimately will lose. And so I think that it's not just about getting that one Republican. It's really calling those Democrats that are in moderate states like Doug Jones and Joe Manchin, and also making sure to call Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski and ensure that they are going to vote against this particular person, or at least delayed until after the midterm elections, based on the Mitch McConnell rule. And not just because Mitch McConnell set this precedent, but also because there are 2 additional arguments that I think are pretty persuasive. One, you are replacing Kennedy, who is the swing vote. It's not Antonin Scalia, like previously when you had Merrick Garland sitting there and Mitch McConnell not even having a hearing. You're not replacing a conservative with a conservative. You're replacing a swing vote who is conservative with, potentially a very extreme or conservative person. His list is all people who we have an understanding are in opposition to Roe. Amy Barnett went to Notre Dame. She is very Catholic. She had a famous moment with former Senator Al Franken during her hearings about how she spoke essentially to a hate group without really understanding the full context there. But additionally, as Robert said, the president is under investigation. And so this particular judge that he is nominating to have a hearing in the Senate is someone that's going to determine his fate in the legal context. And so I think Democrats are not just fighting about all of the different rights, workers' rights, gay rights, women's rights. They also need to focus on the fact that this is replacing the swing vote and the president is under investigation, and this person is going to determine his fate.
Well, in terms of the emerging Democratic opposition, or the strategy at least, in an op-ed in today's New York Times, Chuck Schumer, the minority leader in the Senate, made the Democratic case against a potential Trump nominee. Quote, if you do not want a Supreme Court justice who will overturn Roe versus Wade and undo the Affordable Care Act, tell your senators they should not vote for a candidate from Mr. Trump's preordained list. Meanwhile, on Sunday, Senator Maria Cantwell of Washington State warned her colleagues about the stakes of a Supreme Court vote.
I think that my colleagues on both sides of the aisle know that this vote could be one of the key votes of their entire career. And they know that no matter what spin comes out of the White House, if they vote for somebody who's going to change precedent, it could be a career-ending move.
And Susan, I'm trying to figure out how the Democratic base, and we heard in the clips there, we heard Zerlina going through the issues that most animate the Democratic base now, and that I think it's illogical to assume are going to lead the vast majority of Senate Democrats to vote against this. But then you've got that group of Democrats, and you were mentioning them before, Joe Manchin in West Virginia, Donnelly in Indiana, Heitkamp out in North Dakota. The incentives, the political incentives for them might work differently.
Well, and that's true. And they may also realize it's an interesting problem for those Democrats because, yes, they want to keep their jobs, but they're also supposed to represent their constituency. Many of the ones you just mentioned are red states that Donald Trump won. So that's also something to take into consideration. And any chance that the Democrats have of taking the Senate relies on those three getting reelected. So it depends really how the Democrats kind of treat each other. They're going to have to duke this out.
Robert Costa, what is your sense of, in terms of what the White House is ultimately looking here, the consideration driving this? I've seen suggestions, that Trump thinks of the evangelical Christian base that stuck with him in 2016, thinks of this as an issue of particular importance to them, wants to deliver to them. We've talked here about the possibility of some kind of wild card. Where is his mind? Is it on how easy it would be to confirm the person and make sure you get Susan Collins in line for this? Where do you think the priority falls there?
You're looking at someone with an extensive judicial record because they want to make sure that this nominee could be confirmed before the midterm elections. Important news today to pay attention to. The White House announced it's going to set up a war room. Don McGahn, the White House counsel, Raj Shah, spokesman. They're starting to already assemble the coming political war over this confirmation. And you have Don McGahn reaching out to people like Senator Mike Lee on Capitol Hill, who's another possible wild card pick. But really, when you look at Kavanaugh, Coney Barrett, those federal judges are the kind of people the White House believes could both excite the base because of their judicial positions, but also be able to sail through relatively easy. But as I was reporting today, Steve, Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky has expressed concerns to his associates privately and his advisors that Kavanaugh may not win his support. He hasn't taken a public position, but because of Kavanaugh's writings on the Affordable Care Act, these kind of issues are already coming up beyond just the issues with Senator Collins.
And Senator Mitch McConnell, meanwhile, the Republican leader in the Senate, he is calling for a vote on Trump's yet unnamed pick by this fall. Last week, Politico reported that the Senate's #2 Republican, John Cornyn, was calling for a vote after Labor Day. The article noted that, quote, the Supreme Court nominees since the Ford administration spent an average of 67 days between their nomination and final confirmation. And I think it was somewhere in the 60s for Gorsuch last year. Republicans ended up killing off the filibuster to get him through. But Zerlina, in terms of an outcome here, if Republicans have the votes on paper and they've got those Democrats in those Trump state seats that who voted for Gorsuch, we already saw 3 of them vote for Gorsuch last year. Is the best case in your mind for Democrats here, if they're not going to get Republicans to flip over, is the best case that it fires up their base enough to help them in November to somehow flip the Senate after that?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that that's the calculation. I think you fight even if you don't win, and the base is with you. What we saw over the weekend, I mean, it's not getting as much attention as I thought it would, but there were massive protests over the weekend. The base keeps coming out into the streets, and they're going to continue to do that. I think it's a good predictor in terms of them going out and voting, because if you're willing to, whatever is going on in your life, your kids, your job, all of that, but you're taking the time on a Saturday or a Sunday to go outside and express your opposition to this administration, then you're very likely to also go outside and vote in November.
And just one thing to add is millennials have never had to see this as an issue in their lifetime, especially Roe v. Wade.
Right.
So we don't know what they're going to do. We know that they definitely have a horrible view of the Republican Party. So if there's a way of tapping into that, and actually if they are as motivated as we think they are, that could prove.
What about the conservative base, though? We talk so much about the enthusiasm gap, where we've seen Democrats coming out in these elections. We've seen Democrats protesting. You know, we know the administration was actually hoping Democrats would start talking about impeachment. Why? To get that conservative base mobilized. If you've got a court fight here, could it have that same mobilizing effect?
Here's the problem when you look at that argument. The Republican base, turns out, they know what the numbers are. So Republicans have been focused on, this is the number I need to win. On the Democratic side, and we saw this in New York in the primaries with more than one seat, when you don't know who's showing up to vote, it doesn't poll the same, and you can get a much wider, diverse turnout than you can ever expect. We've seen it in 2017. We've seen numbers 30–40% in districts, county exec races here in New York, increase on the Democratic side. So that's what's the unpredictable part. The Republican side is very predictable. They're not going to appeal to anybody else.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.